Next, I would like to invite the founding Vice Chancellor, Dr. Jamshed Bharucha, to address the gathering. Dr. Jamshed Bharucha, the founding Vice Chancellor of Sai University, is the President Emeritus of Cooper Union, New York. His previous positions include Provost and Senior Vice President at Tufts University, Boston, Dean of the School of Arts and Science at Dartmouth College, Fellow for the Center of Advanced Studies in Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University, and a visiting scholar at Harvard University, Stanford University, and the Carnegie Mellon University. He has done extensive research in cognitive psychology and neuroscience, focusing on the cognitive and neural basis of the perception of music. He was the editor of the interdisciplinary journal Music Perception. Dr. Bharucha is a Pride of America honorary accorded by the Carnegie Corporation of New York. He is a recipient of the Distinguished Achievement Award by the alumni of Vassar College and Huntington Teaching Award by Dartmouth College. He completed his PhD in psychology at Harvard University. He is also an alumnus of Yale University, Vassar College, and the Trinity College of London. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Bharucha to address the gathering.
Thank you, Professor Vikas. So really, most of what we are here to tell you has been said. The world is changing much faster than universities are changing. Now that's a global problem. It's not just an Indian problem. Except that here in India, the change has begun a lot later, but never too late. Better late than never. So as of 5 years ago, the University Grants Commission, which is the regulatory body in the central government that regulates all universities and colleges in India, with the possible exception of a few that have been given exemptions. As of 5 years ago, they've done an almost 180-degree U-turn in the approach to regulation. Whereas previously, regulation was severe and very specific and very rigid. You could teach these subjects in this way with this kind of assessment. And now we're given an astounding amount of autonomy, as was outlined by the Honorable Chancellor. So in my case, I wanted a liberal education as soon as I finished high school. This was in Mumbai, Bombay. I loved science, but I also wanted to do music, and I wanted to study philosophy and other things, and I kept asking people, why are you telling me I have to do this only and drop everything else? No, you have to do that. So that's why I went abroad, and I think that's why a lot of our youngsters go abroad. They know what's being offered. But now India is soon going to be the 5th largest economy in the world. India is supplying the talent of the world, in a sense, is supplying the brains of the world. India should be the global center for higher education and for research. I think that's an aspiration shared widely now in circles in India. When I go to conferences in Delhi and so on, there is a widespread feeling, why haven't we done for education what we have done in the economy or in the IT industry? I'll give you my own view. It's because we were over-regulated. Okay? When institutions, when individuals, families, students, talent is over-regulated from the top down, you stifle innovation. Okay, it's very straightforward. When policymakers, regulators tell every single student, you have only 3 choices, you have to choose science stream, arts stream, commerce stream, and then after that you apply to college with only one subject, you are losing a huge amount of talent. Some people fall neatly into those streams, and they will do well. They will do just fine. In fact, so-called toppers are going to be fine in almost any system. But what about the remaining students? So I approach thinking about designing new institutions of education from one angle, which is my own field, which is cognitive neuroscience. We have a lot of research on how the brain learns, how the brain performs. If we had to design a system that was moving in the opposite direction of how our brain learns and performs, we would design the traditional system. Okay? So fortunately, the UGC has seen that and has come to the conclusion that the best way to develop our talent is to give institutions the freedom to innovate. Let 1,000 flowers bloom. Different universities and colleges may appeal to different kinds of students who have different kinds of talents. That makes sense. In my view, I also want our faculty to have the autonomy to design their own syllabus and their own assessment methods, because that gives the student exposure to different kinds of teaching styles that correspond to their varying learning styles. Some of you who have 2 or more children know, rarely are they identical. They grew up in the same family, but they can be completely different, okay? So India has half of the university-age people in the world. Now that's a staggering number. And yet only 27% of them are enrolled either full-time or part-time in any kind of university course. That's called the gross enrollment ratio. That was the primary reason why the UGC changed direction, because the sense that if only 27% of our youth is being prepared for a future in which they will need different kinds of cognitive skills, what are the others going to do? China is already 54%, double, even though India and China started at the same level in the 1950s. The West is already in the 60s. India should be there, and it should be there very fast. So we need more universities, like ours, frankly, that are designed not to shove information down the throats of our students and say, just be quiet and spit it back in your, mug it up and spit it back in your final exams, but to find out what makes each student tick, and then develop those talents and help the student get on a path to be productive in their own way. Because we don't know what jobs the future will hold, your generation, the high school students, are going to create the future. And I can assure you, with this kind of educational model, there will be many, many different kinds of jobs and opportunities than we can even imagine today. So the key is to unleash the tremendous diversity and talent of all of the children and support them rather than simply tell them what to do and how to do it. This is the key to innovation, and we all know that an innovation economy, whether it be in technology or in the arts or in any field, it's new ideas, new ways of doing things, not the problems you were given in your textbook, that are going to be the future. So that's why when I saw that the UGC was deregulating higher education, thought, let me go back to India. Okay? And yes, I've been, Chancellor said 40 years I've been in higher education, faculty, or leadership positions, but I'm older than I may look. Actually, I suddenly realized a few days ago that I left India exactly 50 years ago this month, finishing high school, because I wanted a liberal education. So I decided to come back and see if I could be of any use, because India is the breeding ground of talent. So the key for educators, and I have to say, we educators, including people like me, are often the problem, okay? We are so highly trained, It's difficult for us to not try to simply shove knowledge into the brains of our students. But I can tell you as a cognitive neuroscience, that is self-defeating. It works for maybe the top 20% of students who can absorb that, who can perform well in institutional ways, and they will be fine. But to bring along the remaining students, we have to connect with where their brains are, wherever they are. Okay? If we lecture at a student who might be physically present in class, but is mentally somewhere else, and I can tell you today, that's the case with most students after the first 7 minutes of each lecture, okay? If we just babble on and blather on, and they're not mentally attending, not cognitively attending, it's a waste of everyone's time. So we need to change the way we think. We need to get students involved in what's called active learning, okay? Not just passive listening. And it's very well established empirically that just relying on final examinations is no longer a good predictive measure of student success later on. You need continuous forms of assessment. So in my own class, I give a quiz every 3 weeks. And I average the scores on the quizzes. There's no final examination. If you want to give a final, a faculty member can do that. But the notion of cumulative knowledge assessment has very little support now in research on learning. People may get an A on the final exam. You give them the same test in a year or even 6 months, they will likely get a C unless they're actually using that information and building on it. So we need to create a system of education in which knowledge becomes embodied. It becomes part of one's lexicon, part of one's thinking and action. I know that our students are hungry for that, because before these smartphones, all students knew was what they learned from parents, from teachers, and a few relatives, okay? Today, they have everything at their fingertips. You, I'm sorry, parents, or we as teachers may tell them something with authority, but they'll just look it up. And they'll say, well, so-and-so from Stanford said the opposite, and so-and-so from somewhere said the opposite, and the CEO of Google said the opposite. And, you know, we know that Steve Jobs didn't major in computer science, and yet he built the largest computer company in history. So there, okay? Don't tell us what to do. And I actually agree with them, okay? We have to change the way we think about education. We, the educators, need to be facilitators, mentors, guides, help our students develop the critical thinking skills to make sense of and to filter the information that they have. All knowledge is here. It's no longer about transmitting knowledge. That's a false notion of education. It's about preparing the brains of our students to be critical thinkers in the sense of being appropriately skeptical, because most of what's on here is not good information. Having the skills to discern, to discriminate between valid information and information that's not valid, what is credible, to question it, even question orthodox thinking. That's the point, and it's those students who will become innovators and those students who will become leaders. So students do all of these, you know, JE, and fine, JE, okay, some students do well on JE and do well in their careers. But JE, as you know, and most of these exams simply recycle questions from past years, okay? When you sign up for a coaching, that's exactly what they do. They bring out questions from last year, the year before, or they design questions in the same format, and they teach you how to recognize the question type. And then you know you have to plug in this formula, that formula. I don't think there's ever been a student with a B.Tech who's gone into a company who's been given a textbook problem. So you've hired people. Have you ever given them a textbook problem that they might have encountered in JE in your software? No.
Like 6 months to student to enter into actual work.
Yeah. So there's a huge misalignment between the education system and what the workforce requires. You talk to the CEOs, they use words like We want critical thinkers. We want original thinkers. We want people who can not only face new problems, but are eager to tackle new problems where they haven't learned, which they have not learned how to solve. But they have gone through 4 years of dealing with new problems, uncertainty, to develop the confidence, to start to frame new questions, frame ways of analyzing them, solving them, and communicating them. And I'll end with communication. Communication and one more point. We live in a country which has wonderful, wonderful linguistic diversity. I think that's one of the many, many strengths of this country. So most students don't speak at home as a first language, the language of the professional workforce in India, which is English, or the university. So we have to bend over backwards to develop communication skills, even if it's communication skills in a regional language, because the entire pedagogy and assessment method has been based on exams rather than on speaking or writing. Not writing on an exam, but producing a document that's crafted, that's appropriately revised, that can be used in any, and there's no profession in which you don't have to write clear documents, in which you don't have to communicate with others who may be managers and marketing and other areas, may not be in your own discipline. So how you communicate with clarity, summoning evidence, drawing conclusions. So we put a lot of emphasis on writing and communication. And finally, and this is also a point that UGC recognizes very well, undergraduates are adolescents. It's a transition from childhood to adulthood. And there's a lot of research in my field on what that means and how you handle it. And any parent knows who has teenagers, it's not easy. There are no easy answers. But one thing we know from research is the worst thing one can do with a teenager is just say, shut up and be quiet and listen to what I say. Okay? Take it from me. You are not producing a leader. You are producing a loser if you do that. Okay? We have to take those 4 years to appropriately guide students through that transition. It's a risk-taking period of life. That's the way the brain develops. In those years, they will take risks. So you have to protect them from dangerous risks, but allow them to take intellectual risks. Allow them to learn about the world, about their social interactions in a responsible way, so that by the time they get their degree, they are ready to go out into the professional world, rather than suddenly struggling. And I see this a lot. Frankly, I'll be honest, in the US, with students who come from masters, who've had their bachelors in India, who struggle with emotional and social maturity. That has to be part of the undergraduate. So it has to be a holistic education, not just in the classroom, out of the classroom, their residential life. It all has to be part of a coherent philosophy of how you develop a child's talent, intellectually, emotionally, socially. And that's what a liberal education is. So thank you very much.